I keep having an experience in meditation of a presence, a loving presence that I call the goddess. And I call her that because she feels very female to me, and also she feels endlessly loving. Her presence feels joyful and light and so loving, so positive, and surprisingly, so intimate. Like she's known me forever, and like she really likes me. And I don't really know why she would like me as much as she seems to. It's like we're old friends, but so much more intimate than that. And this started in, I guess, as far back as when I was 16, living in the ashram in India, a meditation retreat center. And there was a temple there to the goddess Durga. And I used to go to that temple a lot. And there was usually no one else there. And sometimes I would take the broom that was hidden around the back of the temple and I would just sweep any leaves that had fallen onto the white marble in front of the Durga statue. And I would just, in my mind, communicate with Durga. I would feel her presence there, the presence of this beautiful, majestic, feminine, loving goddess presence. Sometimes as I walked up to the temple, in my mind's eye, I would see her and feel her kind of like see me approaching, and she would greet me happily. She seemed happy to see me. And it was just this connection we had. And when I left the ashram, I went back a few years later, and one of the first things I wanted to do was go to this Durga temple and sort of just say hi. And there was a long walkway going up to the statue in the middle of a grassy meadow with coconut palms. And as I approached, I got about halfway up that path, and I started to feel tears welling up inside of me. And I tried to suppress that because I hadn't really done much personal growth work at that point, and I was still a guy who was repressed his sadness really strongly, repressed my emotions, but especially sadness. Like I almost never cried. Even when really sad things happened, I just wouldn't let sadness arise in me. I wouldn't let tears happen. You'd have to kind of cut my leg off to get me to cry. But as I walked closer and closer to Durga, I felt this huge bubble of sadness rise up inside of me. And by the time I got up to the statue and I bowed down to the statue, I started bawling, like sobbing. And fortunately, there was no one around, because it was really embarrassing for me at that time. To cry was just really embarrassing. And the strange thing about that was that I didn't know what I was crying about. It was like all of the sadness and stress of those few years since the last time I'd seen her, I had been holding it inside, and it had been growing more and more and more until it was this big ball of stress and fear and sadness and loneliness and all this stuff. And when I got in front of Durga, it's like I could just let it all out. It's almost like when you're a little kid and something bad happened to you, and you ran to your mom and you jumped into her arms, and as soon as she was holding you, you started to cry. But you weren't crying until that happened. That's kind of like what it was. As soon as I got in front of her, it wasn't a decision, it just started happening. I started bawling, and it's like all of this sadness just poured out of me at her feet, and then it was like it was gone. It was washed away. And I felt embarrassed. It was like wiping my face so no one could see that I had cried. But I also felt so relieved, so much lighter, as if I had just taken off this big backpack that I didn't even know I was carrying. It happened years later that my marriage fell apart unexpectedly and dramatically and very painfully, and it's not what I wanted to happen. And I got a few healing sessions from a longtime mentor of mine. And at the end of our last session together, I was laying on a couch when this session happened, and I was looking up at the ceiling, and I had the experience of like something opened up on the ceiling, and I saw this goddess kind of hovering and coming down, and her arms were wide open to me, and she just had this beautiful look of love on her face. It wasn't the goddess Durga. It was just a female. It was just a woman. I guess, I'm calling her a goddess now, but what I actually saw was just like a loving woman who was floating. But she said to me something to the effect of, I'm always here for you, always ready to love you and to give you love if you'll let me in. You just need to let me in. I was very touched by that. And I was also like, who is this? Who is this female presence? And how could she always be there ready to love me? And I've never experienced her like this before. And how would that really work? Like, I had just had my marriage fall apart, and I prayed back to her. It's like I prayed something to the effect of, I want to be connected to you, but I don't want it to just be like an experience that I see in my mind's eye. I want it to be a physical experience. I'm in a body. I want us to love each other in a body, because that's where I am located. I didn't want it to just be a spiritual thing. I wanted it to be a physical thing also. And I prayed for her to come to me in a physical form. And I wanted to, this is a little bit TMI, I wanted to make love to her in a physical form. And I didn't really hear a reply to that. But a couple of weeks later, I connected with a woman who was just about to move out of town. But in the couple of weeks before she left, we had a very brief bond with each other. It was mystical. Something happened that I won't get into the graphic details, but it's kind of like straight out of the Kama Sutra. Something happened spontaneously that I'd never experienced before, and we both experienced it, and it was kind of like divine lovemaking, you could say. And her name was Maya, which is a name of the goddess in India. But it was like the goddess came to me in the form of that woman. That was my experience. I believe that was the goddess. And that brings me to what I wanted to share, the thing that prompted me to make this video. I've reconnected with this goddess for the last couple of years. For many, many years since that incident where I saw her coming from the ceiling, I didn't, after we made love, so to speak, I didn't really stay connected to her. I didn't keep turning my attention towards her. I just kind of did other things. But for the last couple of years, I've felt this goddess coming back to me and reminding me that she's there. And I have been turning towards her, invoking her presence in meditation every day for a while now. When I ask her to come, I feel her coming to me. I guess you could say she's sort of my spirit guide. I mean, that's how she kind of functions. I sometimes ask her questions, and she sometimes gives me answers, and sometimes she just looks at me like, I'm not going to tell you the answer to that. That's for you to figure out, not for me to just tell you what to do. She's very playful. But one thing I keep seeing in meditation is that every one of the women that I've ever dated in real life, in the physical reality, and there's been probably like 7, this doesn't make sense to my intellect, but on some other level of knowing, I keep seeing that all of those women that I've been in a relationship with, they were all this very same goddess somehow. And like, I don't know how to map that. I don't know how to integrate that into my philosophy. I don't know how that could be true. from my intellect, but I keep directly perceiving in meditation, in my inner knowing, I keep seeing it. That all of those women that I've gotten romantically involved with, even though all those relationships ended, and some of them ended kind of like in very painful and dramatic ways, they were all this very same goddess. I can't see a difference. When I think about those women and in the goddess presence, it's the same presence. It's the same being. And in fact, when I consider women in general, it feels like the same being, as if this divine feminine presence that appears to have no limit, it appears to fill the entire universe, as if it is that presence that appears in the form of individual women, and that all women are this goddess. And interestingly, I don't really see the same thing for men. Like, I don't see myself as like a male god. I don't see other men that way intuitively in meditation, but I'm seeing all women that way. I don't know how to make sense of that or what it means exactly, but it keeps feeling true. It doesn't mean that these women were all perfect and loving. At least on one level, at least on a human level, I would say no, they sure as heck weren't, man. There was real issues on one level, like on a human level. There was issues there. There was bad behavior, hurtful behavior, dishonesty, the whole spectrum. That's why I left most of those relationships. But on another level, and again, this is where it gets really weird, on another level, it appears to me it was the goddess, it has been always the goddess loving me through this individual woman who wasn't acting lovingly towards me. It was always sort of like when she wasn't acting loving to me, this woman, it was like in a strange way the goddess loving me. I don't know how to make sense of that, but I keep seeing it as true, keep seeing it, and it has the feeling of truth to it. So maybe you know how to explain that. Maybe you know how to map it. Maybe it was a test. Maybe it was a game. Maybe it was a teaching. Maybe it was tough love. Sometimes healing is painful, and we don't want to go through pain. We run away from pain by instinct, but sometimes we get stuck in a situation that's painful, and we can't run away from the pain. We end up going through it. But then that pain can make us wiser. That pain can heal us sometimes, confronting it and dealing with it. And I have to say that, all of my relationships have done that in various ways. And so I'm grateful to all of them, even the ones that were pretty messed up. And I guess that's how the goddess was loving me. And naturally, my thought to the goddess is, the next time we do this dance, how about we make it not all about pain? How about we love each other consciously? Are you game? You game for that, goddess? This is your show. I just work here. You know what I mean?